Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. We're recording while it's light outside, so that means the dogs see something out the window and bark at it.
Yes, because we both know none of those dogs have any night vision to speak of. They are so far removed from wolves that there is no amount of vitamin A you could give them to get any kind of night vision in them.
I think any wolf would disown those things.
Just to be mentioned in the same sentence as a wolf, I'm sure is very disrespectful to the wolves. But anyway, today we have some actual on-the-field Packer stuff to talk about, Dad. We have training camp. Week 1 is, almost in the books, I guess. The first 3 days of training camp have happened. Now, none of them have been padded. No padded practices yet. That's still to come. And a lot of the news is mostly about what's actually happening off the field, but we're going to talk all about that in just a second. But before we do, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear here today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out whenever we have new episodes, research from these episodes that we're doing, content from other Packers content creators, news, roster moves, injury reports, stuff like that. Once again, that's at FatherSonPacker on Twitter. And then subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We even put all our episodes out on YouTube as well if you want to check them out there. It's Father Son Packers everywhere. It's Father Son Packers podcast.
Are we everywhere?
Everywhere that you look. Yes, we are everywhere. Check us out on any podcast platform you want. But Dad, should we get into it? And let's start with the news. And, well, I guess the big news is that Jordan Love in these first 3 practices is not participating in live reps at practice. Now, he's still on the field. He's still out in the rain. He's holding in. He's still in the huddles.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, he's still in the huddles, still in the meetings, still, giving, tips and stuff to the receivers and to the other quarterbacks and still chatting, still in the building, still around, which I think is a great middle ground between holding out and being in practice, because totally understand where he's coming from, where it's hey, he's about to sign a contract for life-changing money. You put yourself at risk anytime you step out on that field. And, he's just making sure that just this all gets done. And it sounds like everyone keeps saying, Dad, everyone keeps saying these reports oh, they're so close. They're very optimistic it's going to get done. It's any day now. And, we've been waiting for a couple days for any day now. How would you rate your concern 1 to 10 in terms of how long this is taking? And then any thoughts on, just the situation, because it sounds like it's going to be record-breaking money for a quarterback, which get your bag, Love. I mean, here's the thing. Sorry, I just want to add one last thing before I throw it over to you is, this is the situation you want to be in. You wanted him to play this well in year 1 to where you are, where he has earned this much money. This is where you want to be. Now, people can quibble with oh, he's only had 1 year of starting, but then what did you want him to do? Demand a trade in year 2? That is not his problem that he only started for 1 year. The Packers decided to sit him for 3 years. Now, he played amazing in that 1 year, and now the Packers have a player who, many of us think is worth that kind of contract. These are the kind of situations you want to be in, right?
You don't want to be in a situation where you don't have a quarterback worth paying.
Yeah.
We've seen that. It's in the division.
Hey, you couldn't go even 5 minutes without throwing any kind of subtle jabs. I mean, you can have no salary cap problems if you just don't have any good players. Right.
So people complaining about the salary cap problems, well, you want to have good players and you pay good players.
Yeah. This is, and people are I don't think you can win with any player making $55 to $60 million. And it's that's just the way the NFL is. You pay these quarterbacks this money. You see it every single time. And yeah, it's going to seem like a lot of money now. When Justin Herbert signed his contract, it seemed like a lot of money. Now he's the 6th highest paid quarterback or around there. So it's the salary cap. 10th. The salary cap's going to keep going up. These deals are going to keep out-competing one another, and that's just the way that it is, right?
Yeah, and if you sign him to a longer contract, it becomes a bargain by the end. So that's kind of probably what's going on. Figure out how many years, how many guarantees.
How the structure is. It seems like it's a lot of, what we've kind of assumed the last 3 days or 4 days is a lot of it's about the structure, that they both seem to agree on a number and that he's worth that number. But a lot of it's about the structure. Do you have any concern with not with his decision to miss camp, but just the fact that he is missing some of these reps, because it sounds like the offense, and we'll get into it in a bit, just is not working right now at all. Real confidence builder for the defense.
The longer the Packers go into practice without Love, the higher the price gets.
Apparently, every single rep he's not taking, it's going up by about $10,000.
The defense is dominating the practices so far. But in terms of what he's missed so far, what has he missed? He's missed probably, reps without pads one of the days in a torrential downpour.
Yeah. Just like can't even get reps anyways, probably really at that point.
Yeah. So I don't want to see it go into the padded practices. Yeah. That's the main thing, which
it kind of seems like it is
starting Friday.
Yeah. Starting tomorrow as we record this on Thursday, July 25th, which it seems like it might. I really would hope it won't, but I won't be concerned until it goes over a week. I'm giving the over under on Sunday. Past that, I'm going to be like, dang, like we really need to get him out there. Not like I'm putting pressure on him or anything. Not that I have that kind of sway at all, but not that I feel like it's his issue. It's just like, hey, both sides, but specifically the Packers, like, let's get this done. Russ Ball, let's just sign the contract.
Let's get it done.
Yeah, but
don't get too hung up.
That's the big news contract wise. Anything else on the Love stuff that you wanted to touch on? I mean, I think it's great that he's there, like that he's holding in. It's a good compromise, I think.
Right, and by being there in person, he's not like raising a stink or anything, or maybe shouldn't be causing any hard feelings. It seems like everybody's kind of on board with it, and that he's not like disappeared. So that's I think a good thing, and maybe will smooth things over when he's ready, or make that things are not going to be rough. That we have to smooth over when it's time for him to play.
Yeah, I mean, knock on wood. But yeah, it seems like both sides are like, it's going very like amicably. Like it seems like it's just it is one of those things when you're doing this much money, deals worth this much money, it's going to take time to get the structure exactly how everyone wants it. But on the other side, speaking of big deals, we did have one big deal done over the weekend for the Packers, and that was defensive tackle Kenny Clark, brought back on a 3-year, $64 million extension. He only had 1 year left on his deal, so Packers are going to have him for another 4 years. This makes him the 10th highest paid defensive tackle in the league per Spot Track, and honestly, that's a deal. Like, because, I mean, I think he's worth plenty more money than that. He's getting, a little over 21 a year? That's a great deal.
On average, yeah, over the next 4 years, I guess.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Christian Wilkins, when he just went to free agency, was making got a $27.5 million a year deal. So for them to get Kenny down there at 21.5, I was expecting more around 25. A great deal for the Packers. Don't you think that? And just great to get that linchpin of the D-line back. He's only 28 years old.
Yeah, so I didn't necessarily expect this to happen. Maybe not at all. Or they would just let it play out and see what happened. And they would try to save money there. But even though their defensive line seems to be getting better, he is still by far their best defensive lineman.
Oh, yeah.
By a huge margin.
By a good tier or two, maybe 2 to 3 tiers. And we've seen, let's forget defending the run without him there. They can't do much of anything without him there sometimes. Like, it can be tough out there without Kenny.
And he had his best year in terms of sack production just last year.
Exactly.
So from that perspective, it doesn't seem to be slowing down.
But I do agree with you that I was not like getting my hopes up for this contract getting done, just because we know Green Bay hates giving out third contracts. They just don't do it very often at all.
Yeah, and I was wondering if they're going to feel like, okay, if it's not a quarterback, we're not going to do it anymore after the Bakhtiari experience.
I thought they were going to feel like they got burned by that too. I thought they were going to be like, well, we tried, and it went terribly. We tried to tell you we don't like giving out these third contracts. We made an exception, and it went really badly for us. But I think that would have been learning the wrong lesson, because I think that was just such a freak accident. And
they should realize how fluky that was and how unusual his recovery was compared to most other injury recoveries.
Yeah, but great to have Kenny back. I mean, a leader on the defense as well. He's the only player still on the team that was added by Ted Thompson, which is just a crazy number to think about, that has shifted so rapidly from just a few years ago when it felt like the entire team was like Ted Thompson building blocks. But yeah, he's the only one. He's the only one left. Isn't that crazy?
I mean, there are not even that many left who are pre-LaFleur.
Yeah. I mean, it's just Jair
But I'm thinking maybe it's just Kenny and Jair.
That kind of sounds right to me. Isn't that kind of crazy to think about? I know it's been 6 years now, so I guess
when was Elton drafted?
Elton was drafted same year as Gary and Savage, I think. So that would have been Goody with LaFleur's first year. But yeah, last Ted Thompson guy, which is kind of crazy. Anything else you wanted to add on Kenny, or should we go on to our last two little pieces of news?
Sure. Last two pieces of news.
Yeah, and so Packers did make one roster move. They added quarterback Jacob Eason, who they had in for a tryout back in the spring. Camp arm, pretty much. They're just going to have him out there throwing balls while Love is missing, pretty much. Or not missing, but while Love isn't throwing. They just seemed like they needed another arm to run all the drills that they wanted, so they brought Eason back. Seemed to like him well enough in the spring. And for that, though, they cut long snapper Peter Bowden, who I think both of us had beating out Orzik in our like kind of initial in our head 53s, right?
It didn't take that
nope
long for that prediction to get shot down. Yeah, I was expecting Bowden over Orzik.
I was yeah, because Orzik really was quite poor last year, to be honest. And it seems like Bisaccia wants to roll with him again, and I guess we'll see. I guess we will see. He was not very good last year, in my opinion. A lot of snaps that were wayward, and Daniel Whelan had to do his best to get him down. And I think that whole entire operation was not just on Carlson, even though he usually bears the brunt of the criticism. And then the last bit is that the Packers restructured guard Royce Newman, brought him down to about what's closer to a minimum contract, a little bit over a minimum with just a few guarantees. He was I think it was like a vested veteran situation or something like that, where he was actually going to make upwards of $3 million. And so he wasn't going to make it to camp pretty much because they would have cut him because he makes so much money for what he is. So I don't know. Anything you want to say on that?
Based on how many snaps he got his rookie year. So he played so much his rookie year that he got an escalator up to over $3 million, none of which was guaranteed.
I will never understand rookie year Royce Newman. How was he decent? And then just his play.
What happened?
His play just fell off the face of the earth, and he just became almost unplayable. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, it was like the training camp experiment of Newman at right tackle just broke
his brain.
Him.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, he could never pick up a stunt, to be fair, and still can't.
That was one of the things that was, always stood out as a problem for him.
But he was like a passable right guard, like a backup 6th, 7th guy who you were happy to have as a 6th, 7th guy his rookie year. And then he just got worse every year. It's been tough for him, and I think it's going to be a fight to make the roster. But that kind of does lead us into, these battles to make the roster, training camp. Yeah, anything else on these?
It depends on who he's battling with.
I know, right? Anything else on the news and notes you wanted to touch on, though, Dad, or should we get into our takeaways from training camp so far?
I think we move on.
Okay.
To the next.
Well, so we each have a handful, I think 3 or 4 each, of takeaways from the first 3 days of training camp. Now, keep in mind, all of these have been not in pads. The offense has struggled. I'm gonna say that right now, but keep in mind they have been without Elton Jenkins one of the 3 days. They have not had Jaden Reed. They have not had Zach Tom. They have not had Tucker Kraft, and they have not had Jordan Love. So if I told you a team didn't have their quarterback, their 2 best linemen, their best receiver, and their second tight end, it's going to be a struggle for the offense. Don't you think that's fair to say, Dad?
Yeah, the blocking people has been a problem.
Blocking people has been a problem. Quarterback play has been a problem. Receiver play has probably not been a problem, but we wouldn't know because the ball has not been getting to them.
Then one day, like, catching the ball must have been difficult on the second day when it was pouring
rain. But anyway, just leading into it, Dad, what is your first takeaway from these first 3 days of training camp?
Okay, my first takeaway, after you stole one of my takeaways, was that Jordan Morgan has been playing almost exclusively at guard. And, I mentioned it because it was one of the things we wanted to that I had on my list of things to watch for him. Where are they going to line him up? How quickly will they settle on a spot? And they seem to mostly be settling on a spot now. So despite being somewhat thin at offensive tackle with Zach Tom out, we're not really doing full reps yet. He's off the PUP list now. And Caleb Jones sitting out with a hamstring?
Yeah, I believe it's a hamstring, yes.
And Dillard struggling. Morgan still has been getting the majority of his snaps at right guard. I guess he did get some at right tackle per Bill Huber of Sports Illustrated. On day one, it seemed like Morgan was sharing first team work at right guard with Sean Ryan. And then when Jenkins went to center, he was at, I think, right guard, and Ryan moved over to left guard when the first day where Jenkins played a fair amount of center. And then on day 2, he rotated with Sean Ryan at right guard per Andy Herman. And with Jenkins taking a vet day off on day 3, Morgan started at right guard with Ryan at left guard. During the walkthrough on Wednesday, Tom did a little bit of right tackle walkthrough, so not any actual playing. And Jenkins resting. Morgan was at right guard then too. So it's been a few snaps, I guess, at right tackle and mostly right guard besides that.
Yeah, I've only seen the reports of him at right guard, but I will say, besides the reports of like him playing at right guard, Haven't heard his name mentioned at all, which I think is a
true,
good
in
thing.
contrast to some of the other players.
Some of these other offensive linemen are getting their names mentioned a lot. I'm not gonna say any more than that, but I will say I have not heard Jordan Morgan's name mentioned in because usually if you're hearing an offensive lineman's name a lot, they're getting beat a lot.
And there's one offensive lineman whose name I think we've heard more than any other.
Yep.
But the other thing that's kind of surprising about all this is we had talked about it as well, about him finding a spot and switching both from tackle to guard and from the left to the right. It seems like he's gotten hardly any snaps at left guard.
I mean, this is
where it's all been right guard.
Well, this is where I wanted him to play, with right guard, because I felt like if you put him at left guard, that left side of the line is Walker and him, probably the two of the least experienced guys on that line, we'll say. But if you put him at right guard, you have Elton at left guard, and it feels like you're balancing the line a little bit better, despite the fact that you're making it a little bit harder on him. But he has been, not the initial starter at right guard, so maybe they're still, easing him in. But like we said before, Matt LaFleur did say during OTAs and minicamp back in the spring that once we get to training camp, they're going to try and settle him down into one spot. And it's been right guard so far, so keep an eye on that.
And even when they've had the choice, when Ryan and Morgan have both been in, it's been Ryan at left.
Yeah.
And not Morgan at left.
Yeah, that's something to keep an eye on. And I did just want to touch on this because I realized we forgot to mention it during the news part. But the injury report, like you mentioned, Caleb Jones has a hamstring injury. Corey Ballantyne also has a hamstring injury. Marshawn Lloyd has a hip injury. Donovan Jennings has a knee injury. And Tucker Kraft has a pec injury. Now, none of them have participated in training camp yet. However, we have seen that Jaden Reed, who missed the first couple days with a toe injury on the NFI list that I guess he sustained during, a kids camp, he was back day 3, not in team drills yet, but he was participating. And then Zach Tom, who also had a pec injury, has been activated off of the PUP and is also practicing, but just not in full-on 11-on-11s. And then Tyler Davis is also back practicing, which is good. Oh, and then Katana Oladapo is also still missing with his toe injury he sustained. He's also still on the NFI list. So apologies for not running down that injury report earlier, but just wanted to touch on it. Dad, anything else on Morgan or anything about that right guard spot you wanted to touch on right after that? I just wanted to get those injury report out the way because I realized we'd forgotten to talk about it.
Well, I was going to say, I think I saw a quote from Lloyd that he doesn't expect to be out too long.
Yeah,
and his hip injury, something he picked up in some kind of rookie practice.
Oh, and then Matt LaFleur also mentioned he didn't think it was going to be long, but it was at least not going to be the next couple of days, is what he said. He's still going to miss a couple days, he thought, but that he shouldn't be gone too long, hopefully. And that'd be awesome because, as revamped as Dylan has maybe looked in practice, which maybe we'll talk about a bit later, I think that dynamism that Lloyd can bring to this offense, assuming he can hold on to the ball, would be really impactful for them.
Yeah, it would have been nice to see him in that rainy day, how that went.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to tell how the running game looks when no one has pads and you can't tackle.
It's going to make a big difference when the pads go on. I think that's the other thing about the offensive line. It's been kind of rough on them without pads.
Yeah. But that kind of leads me into my first one, which is offensive line, and specifically Andre Dillard, and the offensive line depth, I think, is becoming more of a question mark for me. So we've kind of seen Dillard really struggled through the first 2 days, to the point where at one point in practice 2, Rashawn Gary had 3 sacks in 4 plays at one point going at Dillard. And he really just could not block much of anyone at that right tackle spot. Now, remember, Dillard was brought in over the offseason on a veteran minimum, kind of a reclamation project. This is a guy who was a first-round pick a few years ago by the Eagles, then went to the Titans last offseason as a free agent and was really poor for them last year. As per Warren Sharp that we talked about when they signed him, Dillard was 38th out of 38 among qualifying offensive tackles in both pressure rate allowed and sacks allowed for Tennessee last year. So he was arguably the worst pass protecting tackle in the league last year, bar none. So, you can't expect a ton from him, but he has really struggled so far. And it only took till day 3, like we were saying, for him to not get starting reps at right tackle. And instead it was Kadeem Telford, who spent all of last year on the Packers practice squad, was an undrafted free agent out of UAB, University of Alabama, Birmingham. And so the depth is a question mark because it seems like Dillard has really struggled. We don't really know what Ryan is. And then beyond that, it's a lot of really young guys where it's like, and Donovan Jennings is missing time. That was an UDFA that we were excited about. We don't really have a ton of faith in Royce Newman, I don't think, at this point in his career. And then you got Caleb Jones, who hasn't really taken many real live reps, and he's also injured right now. I think the offensive line is really in flux. A little bit about Kadeem Telford. Undrafted free agent out of UAB last year, has a 1.59 relative athletic score per Kent Lee Platty. He's mostly just big. Everything except his size is in the red. He's 6'7", 322. So he is a mountain of a man. And while he was at UAB, he played pretty much only left tackle. They have played him a little bit at guard in OTAs and minicamp at right guard, but he only really played left tackle at UAB. He played 1,853 snaps at tackle per PFF and 7 snaps at guard over a 3-year period. But he only allowed 3 sacks over 3 seasons at UAB, so he was a pretty good pass protector despite not being a very good athlete. But Dad, this offensive line depth, like I was saying, we have major question marks about Dillard, who's already been demoted. He did still get rotated in with the ones, but is not the starter at right tackle, which Kadeem Delpert probably won't be either, because once Zach Tom is back, that'll be Zach Tom. But we don't feel great about Dillard right now. We don't feel great about Newman. Ryan's a question mark, in my opinion. And then Donovan Jennings and Caleb Jones are injured. So, and apparently
Jennings being injured as well. Because
Luke,
in terms of talking about, where players are playing, that Jennings is also out.
And Andy Herman mentioned in passing that Luke Tenuta has struggled as well. So, what are your thoughts on this O-line depth? Because it's feeling a little sketchy right now.
It's a little thin. I think we're counting on some improvement from somewhere. So, and say like Telford is kind of similar to like Caleb Jones. Green for size, red for everywhere else in the RAS card.
Yeah.
It's also in 1 point something. They're very, except that Jones outweighs him by like 50 pounds.
I was going to say, Kadeem Telford is huge at 6'7", 322. Caleb Jones is like 6'9", 370, or was when he was drafted. I think he's lost weight since then, but still.
Right. And so one thing about that, I think, like, as for nose tackles, these really huge tackles maybe don't have a sufficient comparison to capture their size relative athletic ability.
Yeah,
because just so much bigger.
Few people this large. Like, that's such an outlier.
But it's a little worrisome where I'm thinking about, okay, how quickly can like Morgan and Monk and Glover
because I
come up to speed?
And it seems like Monk has been pretty much only the center with the second team through the 3 practices of training camp. He's just been the second team center. They haven't really repped him at guard, it seems like, in these 3 practices, at least that I've heard. And then I have not heard Glover's name once. So there's that as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I have either. And, I think it's something that maybe is not talked about as much as I think about it is, how much depth they've lost in the last couple of years with, last year losing or potential depth that they thought they had going in, losing Nyman, Bakhtiari, Runyon all at once.
Yeah.
So having to replace 3 guys who are
a lot of snaps. There's a lot of snaps right there.
And so we don't know yet how that's going to play out.
And so I think that's like, after a few days of practice, that's probably the position group that I'm most worried about, I would argue. Just that, like, okay, it seems like the offense is non-functional with the backups on the line. At some point this year, you're going to have backups in along the line. Is this a precursor for what's to come? Can they coach them up a little bit more? Because, I mean, it's tough, and it's mostly tough because, it seemed like the Packers were at least, thinking Dillard could be that swing tackle, bringing him in, but it's been pretty bad so far. I mean, he just can't block any of the pass rushers with size coming off the edge of him. And Telford apparently played pretty decent at right tackle in practice. Like, he stonewalled Gary a couple of times, so maybe he can be a, serviceable, like, 7th, 8th guy, but it's a lot to put on a second-year undrafted player.
Yeah, I think it's really up in the air who their swing tackle is going to be right now.
Yeah, definitely.
With, between Dillard, Telford, Caleb Jones, Glover, Jennings, or are they going to play him at guard?
I don't know. We haven't seen enough of him, and he's hurt right now, so there's no way to know. But that was my first thing. Anything else you want to touch on with the offensive line, Dad, or do you want to go to your next one?
We've done a couple different things on the offensive line now with Morgan and the Dillard and the depth. And since you've talked about Dillard and mentioned Gary, I'll go on to my next one, which is Rashawn Gary is looking like an absolute monster.
Yep.
And on day 2, he had I think I heard this from Andy Herman, but he had 3 sacks out of 4 plays in a stretch. I don't know if all of those were against Dillard, but he also apparently beat Dillard and Walker for pressures at least. quotes from Xavier McKinney. He was asked a question, I think, in the locker room or something, or he called the D-line crazy when he was talking about it. And it looks like Gary is really enjoying having his hand in the dirt.
Oh, yeah.
From Brandon Carwile at Packers Wire, Gary said of the defense, hand in the dirt, not dropping back. It's that simple. From Bill Huber at Packers Central, Gary said, I feel more explosive coming out of a 3-point stance. Sometimes when you're in a 2-point stance, you can create more false steps. With the hand in the dirt, the false steps are taken away. And from Paul Brettel, he quoted Gary saying, just being able to pin our ears back, not think and fly around. It's been fun so far the first 2 days. I think it has been fun for him. So he's been living in the backfield.
I bet it has. And Lucas Van Ness said something similar about a 3-point stance, being like, hand in the dirt, that's real football, or something along those lines.
They're also talking about how, like, real football, like, is that like being a kid playing in the rain and the mud?
Yeah.
In the bad weather, they were really loving it.
But here's the thing about the defensive line. Yes, Gary's awesome. He had a great first half of last year and then just kind of faded a little bit down the stretch. And you just like to see him have like a full awesome year and be able to, hold that performance level for an entire, 17 plus games like into the postseason. But I am not going to buy into the defensive line hype against a terrible offensive line again, because we remember from 2 years ago, everyone was like, wow, this defensive line group is unblockable.
It's the best defensive line ever. Yeah, this is true. We have heard this story
unblockable
before.
They can't be stopped. This is the best of the defensive line. Like, this could be one of the 5 best defensive lines in the league.
Newman at right tackle, Hansen
and
at
Jake
right
Hansen
guard.
At right guard.
Summer we were talking about.
And it was like, wow, this defensive line just can't be blocked. Well, more likely Hansen and Newman can't block was actually the problem there.
But
and so when they're
this year, we have an amazing offensive line, and it's just that the defensive line is just that good.
Yeah, and it's possible. And I think the defensive line this year is more talented than that group was, but I'm not really going to take too much away from no pads with Dillard and Ryan in. And just because I've been burned before, if I hadn't been burned before, I'd be all the way in. But the fact that I've seen this movie before where it's like, wow, the Packers D-line. It's like, nope, they're just playing the scrubs.
I remember the ending from this movie.
Exactly. So I am excited for the defensive line. I am really excited for Gary in this upcoming season. And, he got that new contract just last year. So hopefully he's had an actual off season to like build up his body since he had to rehab all last off season. And so
it should be at a different starting point this year than last year. I'm hoping we get like a 15 sack season.
I think that's within his range of outcomes. I think that's very doable for him. His underlying pressure numbers have been great every year in his win rate numbers, but you just want to see him be able to take on a higher snap count and get home a little bit more, and mostly, more than anything, continue that consistently throughout the course of the year. Anything else on the D-line you wanted to talk about?
Other edge rushers, like Enigbare is looking great.
Yep,
even
he had a couple
Brenton
sacks.
Cox is looking great.
He beat Dillard, I think, pretty handily. Also, if I remember. Oh, actually, it might not have been against Dillard. I could be misremembering that, actually. Don't quote me on that one.
I can't remember who he was lining up against, but I did hear tweets about and maybe something from Andy Herman about how some nice reps he was giving.
Yeah. My next piece from training camp is about the safety competition and just the fact that the rookies are getting early looks at that safety 2 spot. The first day of camp, it was Javon Bullard at that second safety spot as the starter, with some other players rotating through, of course. And then the second and third days have been Evan Williams, who they took in the 4th round. They traded up to get out of Oregon. So interesting, Dad, because I'm especially interested in those two being the guys getting those reps early, because it's not like they're just giving the rookies like the jobs right away and just letting them sink or swim. Jordan Morgan has mostly been rotating in at right guard until that day 3 when Elton took a vet rest day. And Edgerrin Cooper has been rotating in. He has not been the locked in, linebacker 2 like we might have thought he might be. And so the fact that they're giving these starting spots, these starting reps early to Bullard and Williams is, I think, indicative of the fact that they're making like impressive strides for rookies in, meeting rooms, on the practice field so far in the offseason program. And I mean, Williams has 2 picks in the last 3 days. He had one on Tuesday and one on Wednesday. He's playing really well so far. And I think Andy Herman had him as, his best rookie in camp so far. So I'm really excited for this safety competition. It's going to be McKinney on one side, and then, seems like it's going to be Bullard or Williams. And then Anthony Johnson Jr. has actually played pretty well there too. He also has 2 picks in 3 days. So it's a competition, and the rookies are getting a shot at it.
Yeah, it's nice to see. It's kind of interesting how we don't yet know, I guess, how it's going to shake out. One thing that we were wondering about is who is going to be and whether maybe it might be Williams because Bullard's in the slot. So far, the slot corners have been, working off the side as their own group with.
Yeah, it's just been Keyshawn and Kalen King as the slot corners. But I wonder if maybe, we're gonna see some safeties rotate there, and they've mostly been doing safety stuff. And if they can, do well there, they'll get some. I guess we'll see. We'll see if they get a chance at the slot.
Yeah, so far I don't think we've seen it.
No, we haven't. Yeah, it's been almost all Keyshawn there, almost entirely.
Yeah, I was kind of happy to see that they're trying King there, because something that I've been thinking about in the offseason would be a potential landing spot for him.
Yeah, he's definitely, I think, profiles more as a slot corner. But yeah, so that's what I'm looking at there. I think that safety competition is definitely something to keep an eye on, because I think it's exciting that the rookies are already getting looks there. Dad, what was your next one for training camp that you've been looking at?
So I went with the kind of line you hear from every training camp for every team. But in this case, it's A.J. Dillon is in the best shape of his career. No, really. I think this is real this time.
Yeah.
So LaFleur has said, this is the best I've ever seen him, hands down. Multiple people have reported how he looks to be in phenomenal shape, as well as leaner than he has before. There are actually numbers to go with this. According to Wes Hodkiewicz, his article he had on that Dillon is down to 5% body fat at 245 pounds. And compared to last year, where he was at 250 pounds with 8 to 9% body fat. And that, Dillon did a bunch to change his diet, fewer carbs, and even monitoring his sleep habits and things like that. So he's apparently looking really lean.
I mean, you can see it. He looks
jacked out, but still be big.
I mean, he's still shredded, but he looks like 10 pounds lighter. Like he looks substantially, like, especially it's mostly in his upper body where you can tell, like his arms and his chest and like his whole upper body
got
just
more definition.
It's more definition, and it looks slimmer. It looks like he really has and it's because his quads still look the same size.
His legs are
just as big.
Josh Jacobs.
It's actually a little odd looking, just because he's so much more svelte in his upper body, and yet his legs have not shrunk at all. That it's just the build is very interesting. He's got a runner's build right now, but I think it's a very good thing for him, because here's almost Collinsworth. Now here's a guy, but here's someone who I think has really lacked juice the past 4 years with the Packers. Has really struggled to generate explosive plays, get through gaps. You can watch it when you watch him. Like, there's stuff blocked up for him that he just can't get to because he can't hit the hole fast enough. And maybe a little bit smaller, a little bit more burst. I mean, some of the beat writers pointed out, like, in practice, like, he hit a gear that they have never seen him hit before, going through the hole on one play. So if that can translate... I have a
quote from Andy Herman on that.
Hit it.
From I think it's from day 2, that A.J. Dillon just had a run up the middle, and he had the most burst/acceleration I've ever seen from him. Great run. And I think when hearing talk about it, that includes college, not just in the pros.
Yeah,
the most burst and acceleration that he's ever seen from him.
Yeah, because I mean, say what you will about Dillon as a runner. I think if he could be more explosive, I think a lot of the flaws in his game would be mitigated, because there's so many times where it's like, okay, we've gone X amount of plays and Dillon hasn't gained more than 4 yards because he's just getting he's just hitting a wall and just falling over and not able to beat anyone in space, not able to get past people in space, and maybe with a little more burst he can get there. But yeah, I think that's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially with Lloyd missing time right now.
Yeah, and it's been something where even though his top end speed is pretty good, I think it's taken him a while to get to it.
Yeah,
in the past, so a little more explosion could open up a lot of things for him.
Of course. Anything else there you want to touch on, or should I go to my last one? Because I only have one more. I think you have one more as well.
Yeah, why don't you go to your last? Why don't you go ahead, and then I'll follow you.
Okay. My last one is the corner 2 battle, and specifically Eric Stokes. So while some other players are, rotating in at spots, we've seen Cooper rotate in for Isaiah McDuffie, who McDuffie's had a really good camp so far, it sounds like. So that's, he might be holding on to that job. And then we've seen, guys, we've seen guys at safety rotate in. We've seen the D-line rotate in. It's pretty much only been Eric Stokes at corner 2 and Carrington Valentine getting reps at corner 2, or reps at corner rather, with the second team. And he's pretty much only exclusively been with the second team, and it's been Stokes with the first team. And Stokes has been pretty good so far. He had 2 picks on day 3 and a pass breakup where he sprinted down the field to chase Christian Watson. It looks like you have here that Matt Schneidman called him the star of camp on day 3. And so, I mean, it's just really awesome. Did you watch any of the locker room interviews?
I have not watched the locker room interviews.
Okay, they did a locker room interview with Stokes, and it's just so great to see, because he is such like a happy-go-lucky guy, it seems like, where he's just always like smiling and cheerful, and it's just great to see him have a win, because he talked about, he's like, yeah, I had a really good day today, it felt really good, and it's just good to see him get a win after 2 straight seasons being really hampered by injury and not being able to get out on the field.
Yeah, I heard something from somebody today that I hadn't heard before about, in some kind of preseason last year, from some fantasy podcasts, they talked about a doctor who understood Stokes' injury, saying, "Oh, he's not going to be. It's going to be next year when he's going to be ready."
I mean, it was a major injury because it was foot and knee, leg, right? It was like 2 or 3 different things. He was
in a wheelchair for a while before he could actually even start walking, let alone start working out.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be a mystery that he had a really tough year last year. Like this was a guy who was rehabbing from a very serious injury, and it makes sense that other parts of your body are going to try and overcompensate or are going to be weakened by the fact that you weren't on your feet for this amount of time. And hamstrings are tricky enough as it is. And he was another one of these guys where, Watson and him both went to Madison in the offseason to kind of get their hamstrings looked at and see if there was anything that could be done. And it sounds like both of them have tried to do a lot more strengthening, tried to focus. We know Watson had the leg imbalance that he's taken care of, but Stokes also, was getting some advice from them. And hopefully we can see a return to form to rookie year Eric Stokes, because I think the depth and dynamism of this secondary group just becomes, it's kind of an embarrassment of riches there if Stokes can return to that level, return to being, a guy who we were like, oh yeah, definitely worth a first round pick. Don't you think?
Oh yeah. If he gets up to his potential, then the defense, if we can have like 2 shutdown, if we get 2 shutdown corners with the way the pass rush is looking, especially if we're like really aggressive gap penetrating pass rush, and you have to leave the defenders a little bit more one-on-one, his ability to elevate his play could elevate the whole defense. And now I'm a little surprised so far that he seems to be like already taking control of that spot.
Because Carrington Valentine was really good last year. I mean, I think he was the best on the team in both like yards per coverage snap and yards per target, if I remember correctly, while Stokes was the worst. And to be fair, Stokes was, playing with injury, and the 2 games he played was like Tampa and Carolina, where the defense as a whole was completely lost. It wasn't just him, but at least those are the 2 that really stand out in my mind, is like, oh yeah, Stokes played in those games and they just could not guard anyone. But it's probably not all his fault. I mean, that the whole defense really struggled in those 2 games.
Yeah, and I kind of feel that was similar to how in Stokes' second year, he didn't play very well, but the half of the year that he got to play in, the whole defense was a mess in terms of communication.
The team was a mess.
But
they
bad
were losing
communication
every
in
week.
the secondary,
yeah,
and all kinds of things going wrong.
Yeah.
So I think I didn't really hold that against him so much, because I think there was some top-down failure.
Yeah.
For that first half of the season defense that affected everybody, and then he didn't get the benefit of when those changes were made to how the defense was going to kind of be run and schemed, where they started to look a little bit better as the season went on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think, oh man, if he can just hit his ceiling, like Jair on one side and Stokes on another, that's a very intimidating, press coverage unit that can play man to man, play, press and bail. I think just the sky's the limit for that group. But Dad, anything else there? Do you want to touch on your last little thing that you're keeping an eye on at training camp?
Yeah. So the last thing that I've noticed so far, and something we are keeping an eye on, is so far the defensive tackle starters have been Slayton and Clark. And I don't think there's been much in the, to dispel that. People rotated in, but it's always started with Slayton and Clark.
Yeah.
And so I thought I'd revisit some of our notes from like why Slayton might be getting the snaps next to Clark. I think they want to get Clark more sort of a little bit 3-tech off the nose so he can rush the passer more. And per Pro Football Reference and PFF, Slayton led all Green Bay interior defensive linemen in tackles with 55 per PFF. And he was 6th in the league among interior defensive linemen with 42 solo tackles per PFF. He had his personal best defensive grade of the year per PFF. He's 4th in the league amongst interior defensive linemen in run stops with 35. The next best on the Packers was Wyatt with 21. And he had the second lowest missed tackle percentage on the team among interior defensive linemen with 11.3%, behind only Brooks's 9.5%. And he was ninth in the league amongst defensive tackles in ESPN's run stop win rate. So he's kind of their primary run defender right now on the D line.
Yeah, and something that I've been kind of like thinking about is because he's been the starter next to Kenny every single time pretty much. And I think what I was expecting was with this, more 4 down trying to penetrate front, that they would maybe prefer Wyatt or maybe even Brooks there, and that Slayton would be kind of be relegated to more of a situational role, like, 3rd and shorts, goal line stuff, things like that. But it kind of seems like, based on the fact that they're, starting with Slayton and then rotating people in, that we're probably going to see Slayton more in obvious rundowns in base on first downs. Like he's going to be a first and second down type player and base down player where they want more run defense. And then maybe we're going to see more Wyatt and Brooks like for passing downs or just to give them a spell. But yeah, it seems like, because I was thinking Slayton was kind of the odd man out just because stylistically he's so different from what this type of defense usually wants in terms of guys who can penetrate gaps, penetrate upfield. He's more of a plugger. He does have, more athleticism than a guy his size rightfully should have. Like for being 330 pounds, like he can move remarkably well at his size, but just like there are limitations to, you can move well for your size and not move quite well enough to be penetrating gaps all the time. But they seem to be really high on him, and he's kind of seems cemented in that, at the very least, early down, like base down role, right?
Right. So maybe they don't want to have like both defensive linemen penetrating upfield on, early downs and obvious rundowns.
Or maybe they think Slayton, or maybe they think Slayton can, or maybe they think Slayton can penetrate upfield, and that he's just something that he hasn't been asked to do, and that he has the talent to do it.
Yeah, I suspect when there's obvious rundowns, we'll be seeing more of Wyatt and
you mean obvious pass downs?
I'm sorry, I was passing downs. So yeah, so I said it backwards.
Yeah, we knew what you meant.
Everybody remember that I said it wrong.
So yeah, but that actually does kind of make me just an additional question. So assuming like that they're going to bring Wyatt and Brooks on for passing downs, do we never see LVN and Gary pinched inside to play? But because we did see apparently with the twos a few snaps of Lucas Van Ness pinching inside and playing some D tackle and passing downs. But if the idea is, we're going to use Wyatt and Brooks on passing downs, I don't think you want to pinch those guys in then and keep those players who are really developing, who had really good years last year, off the field, right? Like I guess it's a good problem to have, but I just something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, apparently we've already seen Lucas Van Ness lining up inside at practice, which surprised me that they'd be doing that already. But maybe maybe the big take home is they're going to be rotating people a lot,
which is
keeping people fresh and not have anybody rack up so many snaps as say Kenny Clark has been for his whole career.
Yeah, and we'll see if they can sustain not having Kenny on the field that long. But I think this is probably the deepest defensive line group they've had since. Well, I guess the defensive line group back in 2021 was pretty insane. But I do think that back when that group had, Kenny, Gary, Preston Smith.
Whitney, you mean the whole defensive front?
Yeah, Whitney Merciless. It's definitely the deepest defensive tackle group that they've had in a long time. A long time. Probably not since like they had Johnny Jolly. Like that's probably the last time they had a D tackle group, because you're looking at Kenny, Wyatt, Brooks, and then Slayton and Wooden. And I'm pretty high on all those guys, even Wooden, who I think has a rotational role to play. I think I'm excited to see what he looks like in year 2 with, more added weight on him. But so it's a good problem to have. And I think more rotations keep these guys fresh. I mean, we saw back in 2017? That's how the Eagles won the Super Bowl. They just had 8 guys. They just rotated through there and you couldn't stop them.
Everybody fresh.
Yeah.
So that they were always be able to play full out on every down.
It's a proven strategy that has proven to work for teams to, juice up their pass rush a little bit extra, just play guys a little bit less snaps. But yeah, so that's definitely something I'm keeping my eye on is though that Slayton is getting those first reps there, because I kind of thought he might, be phased out of the rotation, but it's looking like they think he can play in this scheme too, which just adds to the depth they have there, which is only a good thing for Green Bay.
Yeah. So it sounds like, he's definitely got a role. It looks like. We'll see when it gets to game time how many snaps he actually plays, but it sounds like he's going to be on the field in early down situations at least.
Yeah. And then I guess the last thing we can talk about is the kicking competition so far.
I thought I'd like throw in one more little sprinkle in the kicking competition.
So
I knew you'd love to talk about it.
I know, right? I didn't see anyone talk about the kickers on day 3 at all. But what I
wasn't able to find anything about
what I did see was through 2 days. Carlson was 6 of 6, Greg Joseph was 5 of 6, and James Turner was 4 of 6. And I think the longest one Carlson took was just 44 yards. But keep in mind, a lot of those were in the rain. And
I think that 44-yarder was on the downpour day.
Yeah, and most of these reps were in the rain. So I think Carlson's probably the easy favorite right now, like pretty far ahead of both Joseph and Turner. But keeping our eye on it, right? Like, there's nothing really much else to say. Is that Carlson's in the lead right now? It seems like.
Yes, and I don't. So we'll see how the whole operation works. I think when they start working on it a little bit more, and maybe did they already see enough of the operation with Bowden?
I guess it wasn't going well with Bowden. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Just don't lose Danny Wheelan. Apparently,
yeah. I think for me, he's a hell of a holder. He must have been to keeping the snaps that he got last year. I mean, my goodness.
And maybe that little bit that Carlson talked about is the adjustment he needed to make from the left hash. Maybe he's figured it out.
Knock on wood, because he's going to need to have, because for this team to get where they want to go, they're going to need him to be good. But anyway, this has been our breakdown of the first 3 days of training camp, week 1 of training camp. We'll still be bringing you an episode every single week for the rest of the offseason, and then 2 a week during the season. So keep an eye here on your feeds. Once again, follow us on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out whenever we have new episodes. Subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.